A few months ago, I released an interview with philosophy professor Alex Galloway to talk about a game called Le Jeu de la Guerre that was designed by French avant-garde philosopher Guy Debord. I was super excited to finally release a video on that game because I've been fascinated by it for a long time. And the reason for that is I think that its history, its design, what it says about its author is very interesting. Back then, I promised a second episode where Alex and I would be playing the game together so you could see how the game works and have a bit of a playthrough of it. And this is this video. So if you don't know anything about the game, you don't know anything about Guy Debord, and you're completely confused about what I'm talking about, I would recommend that you stop watching this and go watch the other video first. If you're done, we can jump into it. So as I said, this would be a playthrough. But it's a bit more than that, as Alex and I, while we're playing, are going to touch upon quite a few things about the game. First of all, we'll talk about the development process of making this digital version of the game. But also, while we play, we'll start discussing the design of the game, the strategies around it, but also discuss a bit more the game itself and Guy Debord's history with the game. So in a way, it's a bit more of an informal chat about the design, which I think was quite interesting. So I kept a lot of it inside of it. So the video is a bit long because I also wanted to keep all of the moves of the game so you can really have a sense for the dynamic of the game, the flow, and see a full play. So it's not a short video. So sorry for that, but I think it does a good job at showing how the game works. Regarding the game itself, I must say that I was skeptical at first, but the more I played it, the more it grew on me, and I slowly liked it more and more, and I couldn't help but want to go back to it again and again and play another game of it. I'm thinking that maybe one day I will do a review about this game as a proper game review. I think that would be quite interesting. But I guess if I do that, it will be maybe a few months in the future. I have a few things that I need to do first, and I will see how is the response to this video also. So I hope that you'll enjoy this playthrough, and if you're interested, at the end of the video I'll come back with some reading recommendation to go a bit further into that topic. You're watching Holy Dance, the channel on history and board games. So the game is for now in beta, and I'm going to bring it up in the stream. So I'm running it on my computer now. So it's available only in the Apple environment, so on iPhones and Mac OS.
Yeah, and this I just apologize to everyone in advance. I know the hardcore Guy Debord people are just like choking and dying at this point that it's running, on an iPad or something like that. But I should just say, have mercy. We all have to make compromises. In a perfect world, and I'm developing this almost entirely by myself. So yeah, in a perfect world, it would be running on other platforms. But this is the compromise that I made to develop it for two platforms, which is Mac OS and iOS.
Yeah, and I would say if people are not happy, they can probably do another version themselves that run on Linux if they think it's relevant. Like, you're not preventing anyone from doing something else.
They can waste years of their life, like I have, trying to port it to Linux. Yes, they can do that.
Good, but so that's the version that we're using today. But there was another version a long time ago, and I think the first time we interacted, maybe the first time I sent you an email, was probably a decade ago when you had another version of it. What prompted you to make a new version? What's the objective for this one?
Yeah, so the original version was built in Java, and it was using a Java game engine. And actually, it was very kind of cumbersome and complicated because it had a 3D mode, right? It's sort of like if you ever play chess on your phone or on the computer, there's always this important decision that the designer of chess has to make. And they're like, are we going to do it in 3D or not? Yeah, they're just going to be an isometric perspective from top, and oftentimes there are these sort of like kind of 2.5D, where you see it from an angle or something. And so the original, I think I was just kind of overly ambitious or something, and I thought it would be important to have this kind of 3D mode. And anyway, the point is the original version was super bloated and totally over-designed, and it more or less worked. You could play it. You could even play it online. It didn't have a single player mode because I didn't know how to code AI then. But it really the code just got old and stale, and it didn't run anymore. And I really stopped coding in Java. And, these days everyone has a phone in their pocket, and it just seemed like it was the time to get it up and running and see if the much more kind of hyper saturated tech world today was a better environment to roll it out. So anyway, the game got literally every single line was completely rewritten in a new language called Swift, which is sort of the language that most Apple development is written in. And I should say, all the art and design was done by this great designer named Mushan Zeraviv. There's a beautiful soundtrack to the game, which was written by two great artists, DJ Rupture and Matt Shadatek. And my friend Daniel Perlin also did some of the sound effects. He did all of the sound effects except for a few extra little ones that I had to add. So it originally was kind of a group effort. I'm the one who's wasted most of my life programming it and updating it. But it definitely was a group effort, and I really appreciate all the contributions from those other artists.
So let's jump in. So I'm going to start an online game, because that's also, you were saying, a new feature. So you can play against the AI in practice. You can play tabletop. So you can either play against yourself or give the phone or the device to someone else, and each are going to play their turn. We have this online function. And your org iOS, is that
you?
Yeah.
Am I in there? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So I'm sending you an invite. And I'm going to play I'm going to give you Guy Debord's side. I'm going to play as the North.
Okay.
And I'm going to go for the classic. So that's the formation from the book, Basic 87. Yeah. So let's be classic. Let's be.
And I should say the formations are just, I just put these together myself. The idea is that when you start the game, I guess I'll also play classic 87. So when you start the game rules stipulate that you can arrange the pieces on your side of the board in any configuration you want. So to just kind of simplify that process for the software version, I wanted to kind of streamline it a little bit. And so the game prompts you with these 6 different configurations, which you can actually edit in the settings yourself. So you can customize that if you want. So yeah, this is the opening position of this sort of historic game from 1987.
And so you're going to be playing the South, and this is the formation that you start with. Maybe we could talk first about the geography of the game, because it's always going to be looking like this. There is no variability in the geography, but it's quite unique in the sense that it looks a bit like chess with white and black squares, but you can see straight away that it's not only that. So you want to talk a bit about the geography of the board?
Yeah, sure. So it's a larger board, as you can see. So it's 20 by 25 squares. It has a northern faction and a southern faction, just shown here in red and sort of orange. There are 2 bases, 2 arsenals, which are depicted as these sort of tents, which you see on the bottom baseline for south, and then sort of in an irregular pattern toward the top for north. And then we can talk about some of the different units in a second. But one of the things that you should be able to see are these sort of dashed lines that propagate across the board. And these are the lines of communication that we talked about earlier. And the lines of communication originate from the arsenals, and they radiate out in the directions of the compass. So on 45-degree angles, and then horizontal and vertical. And they radiate out across the landscape until they run into a mountain or some obstacle, or if they run into an opponent, they're also blocked. And then you'll also see that there's special little units called transmission units or relays. And they're also depicted with a little flag motif. And they reflect the lines of communication. So if the communication hits a relay, it acts like a reflection, like a beacon that reflects it also in the directions of the compass. And so these mobile beacons, these mobile transmission relays allow you to kind of further direct, your lines of communication into parts of the board that aren't naturally covered by the lines that are emanating from the arsenals. I'll add one other note, which is I did say earlier, and we were talking earlier about how this basically models what we call symmetric warfare. But I will say, Debord, it turns out, was a pretty good game designer, or at least he had some basic intuitions, in the sense that he knew that he had to make the board itself slightly asymmetrical, which would give some variety to playing the different sides. And so the asymmetry is found in two things, or I guess three things. The design of the mountain ranges. So you can see there's a sort of L-shaped mountain range on the top and the bottom, and they're slightly different. And then also the positions of the arsenals, and then also the forts, which we haven't mentioned, which are the black immobile parts of the landscape. Those are also slightly asymmetrical in their design. People always ask whether there could be a sort of level designer and we could design new maps. And that's a fantastic idea that I want to do in future editions. But my initial desire for the game was to really kind of clone and be true to Debord's version of the game. And in his version of the game, you can't move the arsenals, you can't move the forts, and you can't move the mountains. The arsenals and forts and mountains were literally welded to the metal game board, so you physically can't move them. But sure, conceivably in a future edition, we could have a kind of, Counter-Strike style, like, array of different
maps.
Different maps, which would be super cool and fun. I mean, I think it would take a while to really fine tune them. This board ends up being really fun to play. And so it would take a while. Like, I don't think every configuration or just one that you make up off the top of your head would be very fun or playable. But certainly that's a possibility as well.
And you have a lot of variability from being allowed to start with your setup secretly, which is quite interesting. So maybe we can start playing a bit and explain the rules along the way. So maybe just the base sequence of play is each player in order are going to be able to move 5 of their pieces. And then as a last action, if possible, attack another one. And I guess you'll explain how you can attack another piece when we get to that point. But yeah, you do this, you move 5, then your opponent move 5. And maybe you want to speak a bit about what the different pieces do, and when you do this, I would be taking my turn.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So there are, how many? I guess 8, I think, different classes of pieces. Gosh, I should know this off the top of my head.
There's 6, right? Because you've got artillery, the 2 types of artillery, infantry, cavalry, and then you've got the 2 types of relays.
Okay, 6. Yeah, okay. I should know that. So yeah, there's the 2 non-combat units, which we already mentioned, which are the relays, and they're depicted with the little striped flag motif. And then you just have pretty basic units. You have an infantry unit. You have 2 types of artillery that are just differentiated by whether they can move 1 square or 2 squares. But the real, star of the show in this game is the cavalry units. They're fast. They can move 2 squares as opposed to 1. So they can move pretty quickly. And they have a special attack ability, which is called the charge ability. And we can show an example of it in a second. But basically, when they're in close proximity to the enemy, they can actuate this kind of charge ability, and their attack coefficient is much higher. And so really the key to this game is using your cavalry, not allowing them to be destroyed. And if you can do that, then you will basically maintain advantage in the game.
And I would say that's one of the things that the AI doesn't get, is that it lets you move your cavalry as a group and just rampage everything without even trying to prevent you from doing it, which is
well. Now you're touching on a soft spot, which is I worked very hard on the AI. AI is very difficult to program, but I will freely admit that the AI really sucks at this point. So it's really, if you want to play a single player version, you can't really do that in any sort of, larger kind of campaign style. It's really just for practice. It's really just kind of for the tutorial to figure out how to roughly move pieces around. And I'm right now exploring possibilities for how I could improve the AI and have it be actually, at an intermediate level of gameplay. But that is proving to be pretty difficult. There might be some machine learning options. Technically, that's pretty challenging. So I think I'm probably going to just go ahead and launch the game as is with this sort of remedial AI that's just for practice. And then hopefully in a future edition, we can have a more challenging single player mode. But really playing against a real person is the way to do it now.
But I would agree. So, and I know that I said this, I said you via email that I thought the AI was pretty dumb, but it's not a criticism, because honestly, if it wasn't for the AI, I would never really have felt comfortable enough to experience the game.
Yeah.
And it really enabled me to fully experience it and really understand the movements and everything. And it was extremely useful in that regard. So that was great. But you're only my second human opponent, so I expect to be completely trashed.
Well, no, I should probably pay attention more, because so you were advancing aggressively toward the southwest, which is a smart thing to do in this case. So just to remind viewers and listeners, so the point of the game is to destroy the two arsenals, because the arsenals radiate lines of communication. And you'll notice that all of our pieces are either directly on a line of communication or they're adjacent to a piece. And so the connectivity propagates through touch like that. And if you go off a line of communication, if you go offline, as it were, then you'll see the piece will start strobing and it loses all of its combat coefficients, and it becomes super, super vulnerable. And so the big strategy in the game is basically to, if you can sneak around behind the enemy and snipe their lines of communication, you could conceivably wipe out a whole pod of units and make them very vulnerable. Now, that isn't the end of the game often, because you can only kill one unit per turn. And there's a lot of kind of big swings in the game where you think you've lost, but actually maybe you haven't. And so yeah, you moving down strongly into the southwest is the right thing to do, because you can easily get down there, and I basically can't stop you at this point. And you can kill that arsenal. So you will be like halfway toward victory.
Yeah, that's the thing that I like about the 87 setup, is that it gives you a clear way to, as you say, go halfway through your victory condition, and then it simplifies your decision space, because you're mostly going to focus on how to get the second one. The thing that you're doing, though, is doing exactly the same thing. And I'm with the Eastern Plain.
I'm not really paying attention here, so hopefully this is okay. Yeah, but the balance, this game has a nice balance, which is the more because of the lines of communication, the more you extend yourself, the more you advance into the enemy territory toward your goal, the more your rear flank is exposed, right? So I don't think I could get down to that southwest corner super fast, but my swift artillery, swift cannon is headed down there, right? And so if I could get there and cut off your retreat, maybe we swap those two units, I don't know, but at least I can put some pressure. And then likewise in the center, in the top center, the north center, you're going to have a hard time stopping that cavalry group that's sort of headed north up there. Yeah, I mean, you might be able to put some pressure on me in other ways, but
yeah, for now, my plan was mostly to occupy that fortress in the middle, because when you occupy a fortress, you have a defensive bonus. And also, you were talking about the cavalry charge. So the fact that if they attack in chain, that their attack is extremely powerful. Yeah. But that doesn't work against units that are in a fortress. So I was thinking if I could put this here, and it's defended by that other infantry unit behind it, and the artillery in the mountain pass, just with 3 units. It's a bit of a gamble for those 2 infantry units, but I'm happy to spare them just to because just this is going to make you move across the central plane a bit harder.
That's right.
When I do the stuff that I have to do, I guess.
That's right. That's right. So the fort or fortress that you've occupied with your infantry, that gives a defensive bonus of 4 points, which is good. And then also, like you said, my cavalry can't charge against your fort, which means the cavalry are just kind of more like normal units. And the mountain pass that your artillery is in also gives a little defensive bump. And so you're actually in a very strong position right there, because the artillery is protecting the infantry in the fort, and the infantry kind of only has a range of 2, so it can't return all the way back. But that artillery is adding a lot of defensive points as well. And so your infantry actually has 26 points, which is pretty strong, and I can't do a charge against it. So that would actually be pretty difficult for me to get that infantry out of there. So I'm going to maybe just continue to put pressure up toward the north. But also, you can see my orange lines of communication. And actually, there are no lines that go directly up to your arsenal. So I would either have to reposition my lines by moving one of my relays, which wouldn't be that hard to do, or I could make some kind of like snake, some kind of snake pattern where just through contact, I could get, I could kind of maneuver my pieces up there. And then you can even do a sort of Hail Mary sacrificial move where because you can move into an offline position, but then once you're offline, then you're inert and you can't move. So one of those cavalry guys could literally just kind of jump 2 squares out and do a kind of sacrificial move to kill that arsenal. So that would be another way to do it. That's
what I like to do usually against the AI for my last attack on an arsenal, is that I do a suicidal move with because it gives me that range of going offline far enough
and then that piece isn't dead necessarily, it's just offline. And so if you can reconnect it, then you can bring that piece back into the game. Okay, so I'm going to end my turn. Maybe we could talk about the combat mechanic. It is, I have to say, based on my experience with new players, a lot of people do not find the combat mechanic very intuitive. And I've really struggled with putting together little tutorials that help make it be a little more intuitive. But basically, the combat mechanic is in some ways superficially similar to chess, in the sense that it's about sort of spatial proximity, and it's about just a kind of absolute superiority of one piece over another. And there's no randomness involved. But it's dissimilar from chess in the sense that you have to, that basically each unit radiates its attack power within a certain range. You can think of it almost as a field. And if you have 2 units that are near each other, they both are radiating their attack power. And so those fields might kind of overlap in certain places. And so the combat mechanic is all about maneuvering your pieces spatially so that their radiating attack power is all kind of focused on a particular enemy square. And then you just add up the coefficients. And if your attack coefficients are higher than the accumulation of all of the defensive coefficients, then that piece will just become vulnerable. And you can kill it if you want, or you don't have to. And it's just a toggle. It's either vulnerable or it's not vulnerable. So it's a little counterintuitive, but if you play it a few times, learning the attack mechanic it becomes second nature.
And I would say it's one of the great thing also of the video, like of the digital implementation, is that it made that whole calculation easy to decrypt. And I will show it when it will be my turn again. It makes it easy to decrypt, because if you long press on one of your units, you see exactly all the units that contribute to a combat in that specific box. And that helps a lot, like figuring out what's the ratio and everything. And maybe one thing that you didn't specify is that a unit can be vulnerable in 2 ways. Either the ratio between all the attacking units and all the defending units is different by 1. So attacker is +1 in favor. In that, if this is the case, the first move of your opponent would be to move away from that specific square, so they would force a retreat. And then if it's 2 or higher, then you destroy the units.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is kind of an obscure rule, and I'm calling it a forced retreat, as you just said, based on Debord's language. And yeah, it basically takes that unit out of combat for a whole turn, and it forces them to move that piece first. I have to say, in my own personal gameplay, I don't find many instances where this is like an active strategy that you can be like pursuing, but I think there are probably cases where you have like a deadlock between groups of units, and if you can just get a slight advantage and you can force a retreat, then yeah, that might give you an advantage because it might force the other player to make a move that's like kind of a crappy move for them.
And it has a cost of opportunity because you have only those 5 moves, and having a forced retreat, decreases your actions by 20%. So it's
that's exactly right. But you fell for my trap here, so we can show an example of this move.
It's a trap.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So one vulnerability is that you're right. Your guy in the fort was very strong, but he was also connected on a line of communication. And so if I move and I block that line, then he goes offline. And now he's vulnerable. You can see there's a red sort of attack halo around him. So now, provided that my pieces don't then sort of make themselves vulnerable, I'll just show you how the attack works here. Okay.
So just to specify, that was your the last move is the attack itself. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'll pass the turn back to you, and then maybe now you can show that that combat dial at the bottom with the.
So, for example, in that specific case, I can see that this unit is attacked by 2 other units. So those are the ones that are color-coded in red. So it has a direct attack of 7 from the cavalry, because when cavalry is adjacent to a unit that is adjacent in a straight line, it attacks for 7. And when it's not adjacent, it attacks only for 4. So in that case, I have 7 for the one that is next to me and 4 for the one that is 1 square away. So that's an attack of 11 in favor of the south player. But my defense is 16. And my defense is 16 because the infantry units themselves defend at 6, and the cannon defends at 8. And you would say 8 plus 6 is 14, but I'm on the mountain pass with my artillery. So that means that I have an extra +2. So I'm defending at 16. The thing with the defense at 16 is if those 4 cavalry units are in a straight line, they have basically an attack of 28. So if I don't do anything to offset that, this infantry here is going to die. And I'm trying to figure out if you have a weak point somewhere. So if I manage to bring up 8 strength against you here, I could destroy that.
I think you can do some damage if you bring in your cavalry.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to do. So that's the thing. One of the traps of playing mostly against the AI. I never saw someone doing something that bold with the cavalry. And when I saw it, I was like, yeah, obviously because an offline unit also blocks line of communication. So having no unit in that black box to back square to defend the line of communication was a major risk. That was a bit stupid. So if I bring this, that would be 7. I can kill your cavalry.
Yeah, which would be a good advantage.
It would be a good advantage, but that would require 3 moves. But it's not that. The problem is what happens next.
Right, because if you make a cavalry charge against that unit, then the leading cavalry in your charge will then be vulnerable on your side. Do you see what I mean? So you might be able to take me, but maybe the next turn I can take that piece unless you can support it more heavily, which maybe you can.
Actually,
Maybe you can. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that it would be at 25, and within that setting, it's actually quite strong.
Yeah, that might work. You might survive that.
21, and then because you would still have. Oh, wait a minute! I'm not killing you yet. How come I'm not? Oh, it's 21 to 21. Oh, oh merde. Yeah.
But you can still get it though, because so your artillery has a range of 3 squares, and right now it's at a 2 range, and so you could keep your artillery in the rear, and oh, maybe you can't get another piece in there.
No, I cannot actually. So okay. I would say if I can go for the kill, I shouldn't go for the kill. I should, So I need to prepare for the kill rather than go
so
for
I
the
got
kill.
lucky. I got lucky. Okay.
You didn't get lucky. You did something extremely unexpected for me, which was very efficient. 2 mouvements et après j'ai besoin de cet autre mouvement. Donc lui va venir ici, lui va venir là. I'm happy with. I need to be careful though. 16 et 12, 18.
Yeah, and that's just for players. The little information screen that you went to is really useful. So the icon at the top with the eye will open up a little reference sheet that gives you the attack and defense coefficients for every unit and their movement speed and their range, which is really useful because I can't even remember these things.
Yeah, and I find myself checking it really often. It's really well made. But then again, I'm thinking it would have been awesome if on the original game they actually put the information on the pieces, because that's just basically 2 numbers that you can have, the movement and attack. No, 3 numbers: movement, attack, and defense. Could have been nice.
I went through different sort of design approaches, and there was a version that showed all of that, the combat stats, like right on the board on the pieces. But you can see there isn't a lot of space just visually. There aren't a lot of pixels, and it got to be super, super cluttered. And so as a compromise, I removed all of those numbers just to make the game look a little better. And then also keep in mind, the game also simultaneously has to be designed for a much smaller screen size. And so I'm constantly making design compromises about how do you design for a screen that's, I don't know, 300 pixels tall or whatever, versus a computer screen, which is much larger. And so, there's things you could do on a large screen that would work really nicely. Like, for example, the first version of the game had a beautiful little part of the heads-up display that we called a sort of inspector. And it was like almost like a magnifying glass where you could mouse over any unit and then immediately get a rich set of stats on the unit. But unfortunately, that inspector just doesn't work on a phone because it takes up too much of the screen space. And so, lots of design compromises, trying to find the right balance between legibility, but then also providing the player with the necessary information. So that combat dial on the bottom of the screen is
super useful.
Is important. And like I said, it used to be that we showed more instant stuff, but I think the combat dial gives you just the bare necessities of what you need to know about every encounter. But my Swift cavalry at the bottom. Oh, and you just destroyed an arsenal, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Halfway there.
And my Swift cannon there in the bottom, it looks like I could maybe go down there and threaten your cavalry, which I could, but if I advance, then your pieces could potentially cut me off. So I'm hiding behind the mountains right there, and I'd have to figure out whether I want to risk going down in the southwest corner, and I think I probably don't. I think that would be a suicide mission. So I'll show an example of the cavalry charge. So if I move that piece directly up,
and I'm going to zoom in so it's really because visually you see that it's locking against each other.
Yeah, there's like a little sort of collar or a little line that gets written when the charge is in effect. So a charge, like I said before, is just when a piece is directly adjacent. Then the cavalry attack coefficient jumps from 4 to 7, which is a pretty significant jump. And then the other thing that happens with the cavalry charge is that you can stack it. And you can stack it up to 4, which is also significant because cavalries typically have a combat range of only 2 squares. So in normal scenarios, your attack coefficient will only affect enemies that are within 2 squares of your unit. But a charge is not limited by that. It can stack up to 4 times. So not only do you have a bump in attack coefficient, you also have a bump in your range. So this means that if you get all 4 cavalry organized in the right orientation, just those 4 units can have a cumulative attack of 28, which in this game is very high. And then you still have the other pieces that may or may not be around who can also contribute to that. And so this is 28 against 16. So this is kind of overkill. I don't need all of those cavalry together, but you can see that, yeah, it's higher than your defense, which means that piece becomes vulnerable. So let me see what we're doing here. Although, you know, you're kind of coming down to the center, and so you're threatening me, you know, from the other side. So I need to make sure that, oops, don't want to do that. So that was stupid. So I just moved.
You put yourself offline, but you can
put all those pieces offline.
You can fix it by one move.
Yeah, so I could reconnect them. Yeah, so maybe okay. So I move this guy in. He enters the fort, and it reconnects those other pieces. And so now I have 2 pieces in forts. And remember, if you get a fort buff on your defense coefficient, then each one of those infantries has a range of 2. And so that defensive buff then propagates to the other units that are immediately within their scope of 2 squares. And like you said before, your cavalry can't charge against the fort. So yeah, occupying the fortresses is a good strategic move just in general. Okay, so I'm going to go up here, and we'll claim our prize and keep on going. Okay. I'm glad the game hasn't crashed yet. This is a, you know, I'm going to knock wood. This is like a successful beta test so far.
Because then I have a bit of a risk. Because if you attack with all of your cavalry against my artillery here, you're going to be at 28. I'm currently defending at 10.
I think also cavalry can't charge against a pass.
Yeah, that's the thing I wasn't sure, because I know he cannot charge against the... I know he cannot charge against a fortress, but I'm not sure. Oh yeah, great. Okay, so I'm saved. I was a bit worried. Then I'm still need to bring in this infantry here to strengthen its position up to 16. That's necessary.
And right. If you bring up even just 1 or 2 supporting infantry, that artillery will be pretty strong.
So that's for that. I need to bring back now this guy, and I have a plan. The problem is, will this plan work? Which is always a bit of a problem. That's pretty strong now. Pretty strong.
I should also say, just as a footnote, is I have localized the game in French. And I'm sure it still needs more like grammatical fixes. But ideally, the game could also have other languages in the future. So, but French players can play it in French as well. And hopefully Alice Beckerho doesn't hear about it, because she might get grumpy.
Yeah, and I took part in helping in improving the French translation.
Yeah, you did. I appreciated that.
I was very happy to do so. 28, 28. Ah, this is risky. This is risky. He's only defending at 24. And you can attack if you really wanted to. 28. Oh, that's becoming a problem. You can do easily 28 et 8, 36. So if I'm not managing to have 36 in defense here, I'm actually exposing myself quite a bit.
Yeah, the cavalry are very powerful, and I find myself being very, if you get within 2 square distance of enemy cavalry, then it gets to be dangerous, because you know for a fact that the next turn they can actuate a charge. So, but if you stay 2 squares away, at least 2 squares away, that's kind of more of a safety buffer.
Okay, so when I'm here, I'm still fine. I can strength. Oh yeah, that was actually my last move. So yeah, my plan doesn't look that good anymore. But I had a plan. It's just that it's. I didn't expect my my diversion in the central plane to.
Okay, I'm gonna take just a turn where I like consolidate
to collapse so fast. Yeah. Now you can actually strengthen, which is kind of a problem for me.
Yeah. And I can send my cavalry northward and try to kill your arsenal, which I should definitely do. But like we said before, every advance also makes you vulnerable, so I don't want to rush up there too quickly, because maybe you could snipe behind me somehow. Maybe I'll add one other detail. So the relay units, which are the ones that reflect the lines of communication, they are super vulnerable. So they have, what is it? I think they have just a single point of defense, and they have no offense. So they can't do any attack, and they don't contribute to combat. Which means if you can sneak around and snipe one of them, which is very easy to do because they have no defense, you can snipe them with one piece, and you take them out, that could potentially put a whole part of the board offline. So they are very vulnerable units that are strategic units for that reason.
Alex, you're giving me problems. You're actually really now in a really good position. I'm getting a bit worried. If I do this, 25 et 31, 28, 32. It's a teaching game anyway. It's just a teaching game.
Yeah.
I think you have a bit more experience with the game than I do, to be fair. But still.
It is a game about like counting numbers, and like we said before, okay, 4 cavalry, absolute total they can do in damage is 28 points. So if you have like a cluster of units and you count up the defense, and if it's above 28, then that cavalry, there's no configuration of those 4 cavalry that can threaten you. So yeah, a lot of the game is just kind of counting the numbers and seeing whether your position is strong or not. I will also say that there is a sort of long-term sweep of the game, and I think oftentimes you have to kind of play the long game, right? Like a lot of the units only move 1 square at a time, which means they're relatively slow, and you have to have patience and be willing to let 8-9 moves go by before you can actually advance, which can be kind of irritating if you don't have patience like that. Another thing too I've noticed is sort of you can do feints, meaning you can sort of let the enemy advance, right? Knowing that will make them vulnerable. So it's not a trick. It's not like you're leading someone into an ambush or something like that, but simply relaxing and letting the opponent advance just naturally makes them more vulnerable. They have more space around them.
Because it extends also their supply lines and everything. Yeah. Exactly. So you have more openings. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you just come out strong and try to hit and try to just take pieces out, that may not ultimately be the best strategy. It's almost more like water. It's more like flow. You have to kind of think of the zones of the board and allow, like, if you're coming out strong, then I should probably fall back. And if I'm coming out strong, then maybe you fall back. And there's this sort of dance that happens. It happens very slowly because it happens over multiple moves. But I do think there is this almost, I don't know what the right metaphor is, like martial arts or something, you know, where there's this sort of choreography of flow forward and backward. Yeah, that's how I would characterize sort of the long-term feel of the game. Okay, so you have massed your units, and so this might be a kind of a stalemate in the middle of the board here, because you're too strong really for me to hit you very effectively. I'm definitely pretty strong. So what I'm going to do is probably, maybe try to get my prize up there, try to go for the arsenal. And in order to do that, I am going to have to, I'm going to have to move my relay up a little bit, because I want to get my relay a little bit closer up toward your arsenal at the top. So when I do move the cavalry up there, they can not become stranded. And maybe I will even, that was a mistake though. So you see what happened in doing that. You hoped I didn't see that, huh?
Yes, I was thinking, okay, that gives me an opening. I'm pretty happy with that, because now I have the mountain pass potentially for myself, and you would have to.
So yeah, I was being negligent there, and I didn't see that artillery was only kept online by that one single relay. So I could, so I have to worry about that. So maybe what I could do instead is move the other relay up, and that will give me a direct vertical line northward up to your arsenal, straight up top. So that's probably an okay thing to do at this point. But yeah, you still have some tricks up your sleeve that are available to you, so we'll see how this plays out.
A few things to do.
You could probably kill my arsenal. I mean my artillery, actually.
Yeah, I can. But the thing is that it will lose all of my turn for something that is not necessarily useful right now. So, but I considered it. I considered it.
I need to evacuate that guy. He's a little vulnerable down there.
Because he's defending at 8. If I manage to have just a charge of 2 cavalry would be fine, but the problem is keeping them online.
Yep. Exactly.
And keeping them online requires me to do quite a few things for that to be possible.
Yeah.
Looking for... Yeah, this is still the weakest spot, but I cannot do anything about it. 36 is a lot. It's interesting. Not the 26. Yeah, that's too much. Too much for me to do anything about it.
And just to remind viewers, the combat coefficients, attack and defense, they only propagate in straight lines. And so that's horizontal, vertical, and on the 45-degree angle. So if you're kind of kitty corner, like in a knight in the Knight's Tour position, the combat coefficients don't affect you in that position. So that's also an important part of combat. Which is one of the reasons why I came to this conclusion that the game is very, very much about structure. These sort of like X shapes and box shapes and truss shapes and lattice shapes that we talked about earlier in thinking about play styles. right? Min-maxing the game is about finding the optimal shape where the coefficients are sort of maximally propagate to other units.
It's a bit of a gamble, but we'll see.
Okay, so yeah, I need to pay better attention here. Okay, I'm just gonna let you make your move. I'm gonna try to protect that guy a little bit, and then we will just continue up north, and I'll try to at least kill something up there, and then maybe just bring these guys back into play. Okay, we'll call that good. There's also a simple chat function in the game.
Yeah, I saw that. Do you have a...
I can't say it's particularly sophisticated, but it gives some simple... I toyed with the idea of doing just a full-fledged chat. There's people go back and forth in game design around this. Like sometimes it promotes griefing and abusive behavior. So sometimes people prefer to have a limited palette of chat emotes. I don't know. That's probably not a problem in this game. I don't think there'll be a big enough player base and probably not very many distasteful people playing it who want to grief you but yeah, the best way is to have like a text chat open in the back channel with whoever you're playing with, because then you can talk about strategy and that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just take some time to
consolidate.
I think I need to keep those two in the back for now. Bring this one in. And maybe put this here for now.
And you can see also when you mouse over, the pieces affected in combat are highlighted.
Yeah, so black for defense and red for attack, right?
Correct, yeah. And that also just reminds you that it's only the 45-degree angles and the vertical horizontal that are affected by the combat range. So it isolates the ones that are in and the ones that are out. Okay. Okay, so I get to kill your arsenal this turn. And I don't really know what my strategy is here, but maybe I can try to make believe like I could take that pass, which I'm not sure that I can.
I'm sure that you can't.
You shall not pass!
You're at 16. I would have to get a lot of units clustered up there and just do normal infantry attack and maybe I could open it up. But it's amazing that you can actually hold that pass with relatively few pieces. So that's a nice strategic advantage. But yeah, like I said, we're kind of at a stalemate here in the middle of the board. So but okay, so I'm just gonna also, when you take a arsenal, that counts as a move because you have to physically move into the arsenal, and then it also counts as an attack. So if you watch, I'm gonna move into the arsenal, and so that was my 5th move, and then it also fills up the attack square as well. So I couldn't do a subsequent attack on this turn.
And I was wondering, did you put in place a system to actually log the game so you could, because I was thinking I would have liked sometimes to be able to generate a GIF or something like this of a full turn that I would be able to share on any platform. Like, because there were some people on Discord that were curious about the game and everything, and I think I would like to be able to just show the flow of the game. Is there
you mean
any
like a
or
slideshow of
even
every turn?
yeah, this, or even just the position in encoded format.
Oh yeah, so the original prototype from a few years back did have a thing at the end of the game after the game is completed. There was a sort of like rewind fast forward functionality where you could step back through every single turn in the game. And I never added that to the new version. Maybe I should. So no, there isn't the ability to do that at this point, but that would be a really nice feature to have.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, we're kind of in a stalemate here in the middle.
It's quite tricky. It's super tricky. If I do this, I do that. Oh yeah, that's not a good idea. Probably need to do.
And also, this is kind of a weird outcome because we both have lost one arsenal, which means that our mobility, both players' mobility, has been severely limited because now there's whole parts of the board that are not impossible to get to, but are more difficult to get to. So I think this part of this game will either end up being a draw, or one of us is going to have to do a kind of risky maneuver where we use our relays to, like, kind of in a very risky way, try to get into a part of the board that isn't natural for us to get into.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do a risky move right now, but the problem is that I'm not sure I can. I would like to, but you will see it coming from so far.
You're trying to cut me off?
Yeah, but the thing is that I have to do 2 moves for that.
Yeah, you have to do 2.
Yeah, and the problem is that, of course, if I'm putting myself here, that's too much.
Yeah.
So I cannot go that far. So I would have to go here, then connect to put you in a position where I can actually force you to be disconnected or move your cavalry back up to reconnect everything.
Yep.
The problem is that it puts me in a position that is so weak. That it's a bit too risky, because then I could eventually do that, put me at 18, but it's still extremely weak. And you need to just bring 6. 6 is actually quite hard for you to bring in that specific spot right now, actually.
Yeah, but be careful, because my artillery could get you from range, and I've got I've got 2 artilleries that could move in.
So we'll 100% need to do that. So that puts me at 12. So okay, the problem. Oh, it's not that exposed. It's actually, there is something there. I think there is something there. It's extremely risky. I'm exposing myself to quite a few things. 3 x 7, 21. 3 x 7, 21. Yeah, those become extremely vulnerable. Yeah, that's the main issue that I have with that technique, is that then you're going to be able to cut me off in the back. And this is extremely strong, so I shouldn't worry too much. And if I do this, see, that's 17, but it's still 17 to 21. 17 to 2, so it would die. But then again, if you were to kill me here, I wouldn't really care, because then. So I'm happy with taking that risk.
Yeah. So infantry, if you lose an infantry, not such a big deal. If you lose a cavalry, that's a big deal. That's like losing maybe not losing your queen or something, but it's and I would say like the swift. Yeah, exactly. And then the swift cannon, which is the mobile cannon that can move 2 squares. That also is maybe after the cavalry, I think, the second best piece in terms of combat. So yeah, sometimes it's okay just missing an infantry, but I would definitely not do anything that would put the cavalry
at risk.
At risk. And same for the relays, very important pieces. But two other little tidbits. So, we were talking about the version that Guy Debord made in the 70s. And, I was interested in like more or less staying true to that project. But importing the game to the computer, there's certain there's certain things that shifted, decisions that had to be made about the design. And so one big thing is, if you've looked at the original version of the game, there's no depiction of the lines of communication. The lines of communication are just, you have to make a mental projection.
Yeah.
And you have to basically imagine where the lines of communication are in the original game. And so even depicting the lines of communication in this game is not staying true to the original. That may seem like a minor detail, but in terms of gameplay, it's huge. And so maybe even for Debord, the sort of like part of gameplay for him was like maintaining that mental projection of where these lines of communication are actually extending across the field. That's one thing. And the other thing is the combat mechanic. So, you've even just kind of narrativized this as you've figured out your moves, right? Counting numbers here and there. So in the original version from the 70s, you would have had to do this simple arithmetic in your head at all times. Now it's not that complicated, but every single move you'd have to be like, 7 plus 7 plus 4 plus 2. And so that's maybe another reason why it wouldn't be so difficult to make a small mistake here and there, doing all this arithmetic over and over again. So yeah, I should say that. And then one other little detail is that, and I worked closely with Mushan Zeraviv on the final point I wanted to make, which is the visual style of the game is very different from what Debord did in the 1970s. And that was just a consequence of us trying to figure out, well, how can we make this game work well on the screen? How can we make it kind of work well in a larger aesthetic sort of, a kind of a larger aesthetic conversation that fits in with how games have been designed on the computer. So yeah, we opted for this kind of iconographic rendering in the design, added color and added a lot of other things in the heads-up display and stuff like that also depart from the original art direction style of the original game.
That's one of the things that when I started playing on your software is I realized how hard it was to play the physical game. So
yeah,
and it's like, and the computer makes it so easy that it's extremely hard to go back.
Yeah, right. And so I definitely had different thoughts about whether certain design decisions would make it too easy, or would make it even it's not even a question of easy or hard, but also just of playability and fun, so finding the balance between having to do calculations in your head versus and so one of the consequences is actually, I can imagine that playing this game in 1977, games would be much slower and maybe even a little more tedious. And playing it on the computer, the game is actually still pretty slow. And one of the nice things about the phone is that it's sort of like correspondence chess, like you can be on the subway and make a move, and then it's more like having a text conversation with someone. They might make a move an hour later, you make a move an hour later, or maybe sometimes you're both online at the moment and you can have a little back and forth like what we're doing now. So yeah, the game does transpire over long time spans, but I think in the immediate sense of gameplay, the computer version is slightly more streamlined, and some of the kind of tedious mechanics are just performed automatically by the software. So
I have kind of a deep question for you right now. so just how do you think that Guy Debord would have felt about the idea of people playing across the world remotely, asynchronously on their phone, maybe while on their way to work or something like this.
I think he would hate it.
Yes, that's what I wanted you to say.
I think he would hate it. I think he's rolling in his grave. But I should say that I was never part of the cult of Debord, so I have no fidelity to the master. I'm not one of those people. I wouldn't even consider myself an expert, quote unquote, in Guy Debord or the Situationists. There are definitely people who know a lot more about Debord and the Situationists than I do. But I did have a relationship to it. I had some relationship to the work, and it was more just this one particular project that really sees me. So no, I'm absolutely certain that if he were alive, he would despise this. He would disavow it. He would do everything he could do to have me canceled and have the game be destroyed. But hey, history, those are the trials and tribulations of history, and this is a new evolution of the mechanic of the algorithm, and he's not around anymore, so there you go. I should also say, I mean, this is a little mean-spirited, but he was also a very kind of mean and malicious person, right? Like he was constantly purging people from the SI, and he definitely was like a sour guy to be around. So maybe this is a little bit of karmic
it's payback.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. I think maybe we're sort of at a stalemate here in the center. We have.
I think we might be.
We have both captured an arsenal. So I don't know. I don't want to call it too early, but this might be a tie game, I think.
Yeah, but I just wanted to see your last move to see how if you would find a way around the puzzle of killing one of my cavalry, and if you didn't, I think I would just. If you did, I would say that I give up, and if you don't, I would be happy to stop with the stalemate.
Well, I think I could probably get one, but
I think you can.
See.
I think you can. It's just that it will require you quite a lot of moves.
There you go. So
yeah.
So if I get, and the key here, of course, is getting the two, cannons, the two artillery, in the proper line. And you see they're both on straight or 45-degree angle lines. And so those two guys add a lot. And then just getting, 3 or 4 infantry also in the proper formation. So yeah, I'll move one guy in just to add a little defensive buff. And unless I'm missing something.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty okay.
Yeah. And that was my attempt at potentially getting that relay in the back. It would have only temporarily disconnected you because you could have reconnected them quite easily with your slower relay afterwards. But it would have given me a bit more momentum to actually manage to push back in the central plane.
And putting
now, I would say. So, what does it say in the book that at the end of a game you need to reflect on your errors and mistakes and everything? I don't know where the lessons are. I will have to sleep over it, Alex. But I will let you know. I will send you some notes about how I think I failed and why I should be purged from the Situationist International. Shouldn't make fun. That's not nice. But it's. I must say it was great to have you on the show to actually talk about the game and even playing it. It was extremely fun. I would actually. So I've played, the only game that I had with another player was asynchronously, as you're saying, and it's like a discussion. I agree with that. I think it's quite nice, and I would be happy to play again with you asynchronously if that's okay. I think
Absolutely.
It would be fun.
Yeah.
But it was great. I would like to thank you for the work that you're doing, because I've been willing to play this game as soon as I saw it, and being able to play it on your version made that possible, and I think it's really awesome. And I think I would add a link to your Twitter in the description if people want to reach out and maybe get access to the beta and everything. But it was really awesome. Thanks a lot for that. And I don't know, do you have any final
Yeah, no,
words.
thank you. I mean, you're sort of the ideal player. So this was really fun to do. And, like you were hinting, the game is just being beta tested right now because there's innumerable bugs that are always popping up, and I'm trying to fix them whenever I can. As I said before, the single player practice mode, the AI is not super smart yet. So that's just a way to kind of learn the rules and see. But anyone who wants to sign on to beta test can get in touch with me. And I'm really right on the verge of just putting it on the App Store. So it won't be perfect. There'll still be problems that I need to fix. But I think, I've procrastinated long enough, and it's time to just
Yes, release it. Yeah, but it's really great.
But yeah, no, I really appreciate being on the show.
Wow, so you're still here. That's cool, I guess. Well, I owe you a few book recommendations then. And in English, for me, there are two obvious choices. The first one is, and that's pretty obvious, is this book, Uncomputable by Alex Galloway. It's not specifically a book about Le Jeu de la Guerre, but in some ways, this book was directly inspired by this game, and I will let you discover that by reading it. There is only a few chapters about the board game in this one, but those chapters are some of the best stuff that you can read on the game, in my opinion. The rest of the book is also fascinating, and I must say that Alex threw me into quite a few rabbit holes with this. It's a really fun read, and you can read bits by bits. You don't have to read it as a continuation. Look into a project, look into a specific chapter, and read through it. It's an amazing read. The second game that I would definitely recommend is this one, Class War Games by Richard Barbrook. It's a bit more esoteric. In the bibliography, you have an album from The Clash, which is a bit unexpected. But the book is really interesting and also contains a lot of interesting bits about the history of the development of Le Jeu de la Guerre and Guy Debord's work in general when it comes to play. So really interesting read. And on top of that, it contains some really passionate after-action reports of games by Le Jeu de la Guerre that are played by this really intriguing group of academics that develop a passion for wargame from 2007 to 2014, something like this. At first, they play Guy Debord's game. That's where they start their journey. And then it expands to a couple of other games. One of them is Reds versus Reds, which is a figurine war game about the Russian Civil War. Then they play a bit of H.G. Wells' Little Wars, which is also quite intriguing. And they end up, to my great satisfaction, playing Command and Colors Napoleonics from Richard Berg. And it's an extremely fun read, and I must say at the end, I just wanted to have a pint with Richard Barbrook, so also a fun read. If you can read French, there are two, one obvious and one maybe less obvious, but recommendation that I would do, that I would give. The first one is Le Jeu de la Guerre, l'émancipation comme projet by Emmanuel Guy, which is probably the newest book on the game. It's completely dedicated to Le Jeu de la Guerre. It contains a lot of interesting stuff in it, and it also contains the rules and everything. So a great resource, but unfortunately only in French, at least for now. And then I would also recommend Jouer la Guerre de Antoine Bourguillot. And I would recommend this because it has a chapter that talks about Le Jeu de la Guerre. But overall, this book talks about wargaming as a whole and its history. But there is a small bit on Le Jeu de la Guerre that contains some really interesting tidbits in it. So also a fascinating book. Weirdly enough, I will not recommend this, A Game of War, the translation from the book by Alice Becker-O and Guy Debord. The reason for that is that it is extremely hard to find. When you find it, it can be a bit pricey. And the original book from Alice Becker-O and Guy Debord doesn't contain that much about the game. It contains the rule, and it contains the after-action reports of a specific game that they both played together, which doesn't say a lot about the game. It's the core material. That's how a lot of people discovered the game, but I don't think it contains a lot of very valuable information. This edition, though, contained a cardboard version of the game that I probably have showed in some B-rolls in the previous video. If you really want to play the game, I would either recommend to use Alex's software or make a copy yourself. And there are actually some really good indication in this book about how to make a copy of the game yourself, but honestly, a bit of cardboard and you're done. You can potentially also repurpose some chess pieces. So that's it about the book recommendation. I hope that you enjoyed the video. I'm super happy to have done 2 videos on Le Jeu de la Guerre by Guy Debord, which is something that I always wanted to do. So super happy to have done that. We'll see if there is a 3rd video. I'm open to suggestions about the format, about how to address the game in the future. I was thinking about a classic board game review. I think that would be fun. The idea of creating the spectacle of a board game review for a game by someone who was criticizing the society of the spectacle, I think could be an interesting take on it. Of course, I would play around with the idea of the concept, but very open to suggestions. And and if you're Richard Borbrook and you're watching this video, please reach out. I would love to pay you a beer. But that was extremely fun. I would like to thank Alex again for participating in this effort to popularize Le Jeu de la Guerre by Guy Debord. Thanks for watching. You were watching Homo Ludens. Play well.